So I want to start out by saying that I told Randy after hearing his talk I wanted to completely redo mine. So maybe during questions and answers I'll have a chance to respond to some of his things. But I asked Randy what his Myers-Briggs type was, and he said he's an ENFP. Okay? Okay. So that was very helpful for me to know. And I wanted to share that with you because I'm an INF. P or J. I could go back and forth. I'm right on the line. So for this talk, I was a J. So which means I have notes. And I will be following them. And but every now and then, if I lapse into my P, I won't. I'll just be wandering around in something else. So, and I'll probably kind of stay behind the podium because Randy was an extrovert, so he's out engaging here, and I'll engage from here with you. So I'd like to start by just sharing a couple of things, since this in the Catholic Church is a Jubilee Year of Mercy. I want to say something about that because that's really important to this topic that we're talking about today. So the biblical Jubilee is celebrated once every 50 years, as it was referred to in Leviticus 25 as the Sabbath of Sabbaths. I think that's a very important word to keep in mind, Sabbath, and what that means. So the requirements for a biblical Jubilee were that the land lie fallow. These are important concepts in what I'm going to be talking about, meaning that it was given over to rest, to let the land lie fallow, that all debts be forgiven, that the captives be freed. We might think of that in terms of what we're talking about today, the afflicted, that those held in bondage are freed, and that finally a celebration be held. Celebration, very important. So mercy is a charism, and it's a charism that I believe each one of us is called to. And the imperative towards mercy is at the heart of the gospel. So this is on our talk. This talk that I'm doing is on being a face of mercy to those in spiritual darkness. And that imperative towards mercy is planted in the heart of each one of us as children of God. So I'm going to begin with a prayer. And this is a prayer for each one of you here. It comes from Matthew. I'm going to paraphrase Matthew chapter 3, verse 17. But I want you to hear it very specifically for yourself. And then I'm going to just give a few moments of just quiet when we finish. And a voice from the heaven said, "These are my sons and daughters, my beloveds, in whom I am well pleased." These are my sons and daughters, my beloveds, in whom I am well pleased. If you enter into the wilderness, do not begin without this blessing. Do not leave without hearing who you are, beloved, named by the one who has traveled this path before you, who travels with you now. Do not go without letting it echo in your ears, and if you find it hard to let into your heart, do not despair. That is what the journey is for. I cannot promise that this blessing will free you from danger, from fear, from hunger or thirst, from the scorching of sun or the fall of night, but I can tell you on this path there will be help. And I can tell you that on this path there will be rest. And I can tell you that you will know the strange graces that come to our aid only on a road such as this, strange graces that fly to meet us bearing comfort and strength, that come alongside of us for no other cause than to lean themselves towards our ear and with their curious insistence whisper our name, beloved, beloved, beloved. So the land of one who is experiencing depression can feel like a wilderness, like a desert, a wasteland, a place without hope and life, sometimes the longest, darkest night ever, or the greatest loneliness known. So it is good to know that every soul has been inscripted with the original blessing that each one of us is the Holy One's own precious creation. That is the beloved. So let me address in this original blessing that comes from Matthew, the context in which I'll be sharing about spiritual darkness. So I want to come to that inscription that we are each beloved. So it begins with inception. I have my words that rhyme too. And you will see here that they are inception, conception, reception, deception, perception, and back to inception. And those of you who can't see the board, I'll be talking about these as we go along. But we're starting with inception. So Psalm 139 reveals that we were known to God in our unformed substance, when we were being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. You know, I knew that psalm for so many years, loved it, said it, and one day it's like it hit me what it really meant, that God knew me before I was formed together in my mother's womb, that I was an idea in the mind of God, known to God before I had any form. Wow, that's a huge thing. So all creation comes forth from some kind of an idea, God's great creativity. So to hear that we have always been known to God, an original thought in the mind of God, even before we were created, is too wonderful a knowledge so high that the human mind cannot comprehend this. It is beyond our comprehension. However, the heart seems to be able to grasp this mystery, and a holy mystery it is. This birth of the true self, our original essence, which comes from the heart of God's power and love. So this true self in us, our original essence from the mind of God, so we have essence. And you might think of this as concentric circles. So if we had just a small circle in the middle of us, that would be our essence. That's at our core. And if we had another little circle around that, that would be our true self, the light of God that has given each one of us these unique gifts or ways of expressing ourselves in the world. So the true self contains our original God-given essence that has been not yet clouded by our earthly experiences. So the spark of God that created each one of us came to life through the act of conception. We become, like Jesus, the Word made flesh. We become, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am wonderfully and fearfully made. So conception leads to gestation. That word doesn't rhyme, that's just a sideline. Which is the process of growing in human form, being carried in the human mother, who is another Word made flesh. And then when the time comes when we're ready to enter the world, We come into the world laboring, mother and child. And the process is not without its elements of struggle, pain, anxiety, doubt, and fear. Ask any woman who's given birth here and the man who has stood by her. So ultimately, we come forth. We are born and we are received. The room has been prepared, whether that's the labor and delivery room, the nursery, the home, the parents, the siblings. And we are given names by our human parents. And then there's a celebration or a reception. We're received into life. So with reception, there is welcome into human life, and with that welcome into human life comes the human condition. Human life is the land of the growth of the human being physically, intellectually, emotionally, relationally, psychologically, certainly spiritually. And much of this growth happens without a whole lot of consciousness. We just do it. Our parents guide us and we do it. Life simply is, and we go about the business of growing up and hopefully with that maturing as human beings. However, in our living of this human condition, there is deception. So we've seen inception, conception, reception, and now we're down to deception. So in deception, we have experiences and we learn patterns, usually from those around us. Our parents, friends of our parents, our schools, our churches, our culture at large. We learn behaviors that are specific to the human condition. We learn patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaviors that are specific to the human condition. And some of them are pretty primitive instincts, like aggression and fear, because we are human animals. And these are built into us. Randy was talking a bit about the brain. So we have the limbic brain, the ancient brain that still responds in us to situations in which there is a threat. Well, it may be a real threat. It's often a perceived threat and not real. So, the human condition, living in this human condition, this is all part of the mystery of God. We begin to go away from this core knowledge. And I'm using this very generally, but most people begin to go away from this core knowledge of their belovedness. That knowledge that we have always been, are, and will be loved by God, who is the God of love, who is so beyond our concept of what we've been talking about, human love. So think about the ways that we use that word love. Oh, I love your shoes. I love them. Oh, I love that lamp you have in your living room. Oh, I love your home. Oh, you get to go on that vacation. Oh, I love that. So we use it in that word love, which is such an important word, often in very superficial ways. And the other thing is that human love is often, Randy can attest to this, anybody else who's in the helping professions can attest to this, is often fixated on rescuing, fixing, possessing, or obsessing about. Obsessing. So it's a misuse of the word love, which is why I think that words like compassion or mercy are so much deeper and richer. And don't we know those words in our heart? The word mercy, I think most of us will have some reaction in our heart. The word compassion, some reaction in our heart. And so the spiritual journey as we get enculturated, there's a lot in our Western culture, emphasis that's put on our brain and our thinking, what we think. And so we try to debate and discuss and figure out who's right and who's wrong and all these kinds of things. So for those of you who are doing the circles, we have the little circle in the middle, which is the divine essence, or I would say God, God's divine DNA in the middle. The next, the true self. The next area would be like our spiritual life. And on the outside, we would have another circle that I would call our ordinary psychological thinking. So, how many of you in here remember the old collapsible camp cups? Okay, yeah, I see lots of heads nodding. So think about that. Think about that collapsible camp cup. And if you fold that all, bring that all up, there at the bottom is the core. That's the essence. It will always be there when the other layers are even collapsed. That's going to be there. So we come up, bring those layers all up. But it has to be full to be able to drink from it. It has to be all the way up in order to drink from that cup of life, so to speak. And so if we look at that in terms of life, that outer circle, which is our ordinary human consciousness, it's kind of like, or lack of consciousness, Randy driving down to Truro. That kind of thing. We have things on our mind. We have places to go, we have things to do, we have people to see, and our life happens a lot on that outer circle, but the real life is inwardly. The real life is a journey from the head to the heart. That's what the spiritual journey is all about. There's the Institute of Heart Math, which has done so much research on the heart and the mind. So the brain is one organ of understanding. But our mind, or human consciousness, goes all the way through our bodies. Our bodies are very important. Our bodies hold this experience we have as human beings. Our bodies help us to live this and to experience it. So the mind is throughout our whole body, and the brain is a different organ. So think about that journey. It's an interior journey when we get to the spiritual part of life. We certainly need our brain. Our brains are very helpful, helping us process and work through things. But the interior journey is about the experience of life and growth. So the human condition is where I think the proverbial rubber hits the road, where we learn or don't learn what we're made of, and who we are made for, and what we are made for. And in life, we get many, many, many opportunities to learn about this, who we are and whose we are. I call it the school of life when we get here. Most of us now are living postgraduate programs in the school of life. So, life experience, there was a colleague of Carl Jung's, the psychotherapist from the late 1800s, 1900s, Karen Horney, who said, life itself is the very best therapist. It is. The experiences that we are given in life, we have an opportunity to learn from. So life is where we learn about the mysterious, the contradictory, the paradoxical nature of God. Nothing's as straightforward as we would like it to be, like cause, effect. If I do this, that will happen. Sometimes that works for certain things, but not necessarily in the spiritual life. And so on this road, loss is a given. Our whole human experience is about loss, letting go of things. And it can be so basic. It can be like at the end of the day, I have to let go of this day so I can open to a new one. That's loss. When I lose a good friendship for whatever reason, that's loss. So all through life, depending on our stages of growth and development, it's about letting go, which is loss, and then opening so that we can receive what comes. whatever life and God have in mind. So relationships flourish and grow in this, and they struggle, and sometimes they end. So relationships is a very key word in this process. God is all about relationship. God is in relationship to the Holy Trinity. God is in relationship. We're a body, mind, spirit. Within our bodies, we are in relationship with these different aspects of ourselves. But we may see ourselves, we may be very disconnected from those aspects of ourselves. So there are many things that become broken, and they can't be fixed, and they can't necessarily be put back together again, although our dominant worldview would tell us otherwise, that we should be able to fix it. The other thing in this particular society that we live in is that we pursue certain things as higher values, and they are illusions. And you'll recognize them, illusions of success, safety, status, recognition, power and control, often pursuits that in the end leave us empty and despairing, angry, and sometimes feeling duped. This is all part of our learning in the school of life. So enter spiritual darkness. So we have depression, which can be a clinical condition, and there's many different kinds of depression, as Randy talked about. And we also have, in the spiritual tradition, of what's known as spiritual darkness. This is less known. Our secular world has not taught us much at all about this process, even though the saints and the mystics throughout our Christian heritage have had a great deal to say about it. So, physician turned spiritual director Gerald May wrote in a book, The Dark Night of the Soul. A psychiatrist explores the connection between darkness and spiritual growth. Writes that spiritual darkness serves a purpose in transitioning from compulsively trying to control one's life. Anybody identify with that? We are all. Control is a big thing for so many of us. Transitioning from compulsively trying to control to one life towards a trusting freedom and openness to divine presence, not just God's presence in our lives. I think many of us would say we know God is present in our life, but trusting that God is acting in our lives, even though we may not have that evidence we would like to see, because our scientific worldview says we should have evidence, and God is beyond our being able to capture. So in life, this process, now people can have, because I think about this at the Boyne Pastoral Counseling Center, where I would say the majority of people who come in for our services are dealing with depression and anxiety. People can have these kinds of conditions, which truly are mental health issues, and they can have spiritual darkness. They're not necessarily separate. Often they go hand in hand. So in spiritual darkness, there are usually feelings of emptiness and a lack of energy for the old ways or our usual ways of living. I think about the old Peggy Lee song, is that all there is? And often these people will come for spiritual direction just saying something is out of sorts. Sometimes they've gone for counseling and just know there is something more, and on their own may learn about spiritual direction, which is not as widely known as an avenue of support as traditional therapy and counseling is. And the thing is that we may look at myself, and I may look at myself and say that I'm depressed. And certainly we know those feelings within ourselves, but there's also something more going on. So St. John of the Cross teaches us much of what we know about spiritual darkness, which he calls obscura. Obscura. And obscura means is hidden. I can't say it very well. It's beyond my level of intellectually being able to comprehend or analyze. And for one who has been faithful in practicing their faith with intention, with devotion, this probably is going to creep in with feelings of dryness in the ways that they've prayed or related to God. It's these feelings of dryness. That felt sense of God leaves. And that can be very distressing for many to feel that God is absent or God has gone away. Whereas in spiritual dryness, that may actually be happening so that we are not so dependent upon needing the felt sense of God. We begin to grow in our faith so that we know in the fibers of our being that God is with us and there regardless of what I'm feeling or thinking. God is so much more than my thoughts, so much more than my thinking. So John of the Cross, to help people understand, this was the obscurity and confusion of spiritual darkness, describes 3 signs to help people differentiate between what a dark night is from other potential causes such as I feel terrible because I did something wrong and I have shame and guilt about it. A lack of desire, I just really don't give a darn. You know, that's very different than I just can't, what has happened to me? I just, I can't, the person just I don't really care at all about this God thing. So there's a lack of desire. Diagnosing physical illness or clinical depression or other psychological dysfunction is really, really important in this process. So I think these different aspects of understanding spiritual darkness are important both for all of us as human beings to understand that this is part of our nature in spiritual growth, but also for caregivers, care providers, whoever they might be. So John suggests that there are signs for spiritual people to notice within themselves. But Gerald May says, and boy, I really agree with him, that it is very difficult to apply these signs to ourselves. Sometimes we're not the best judges of ourselves. We can't see ourselves clearly. That's part of the obscura. And we can't always see what's going on deep, deep within inside of us. So even if all of the signs are there and the person has some kind of awareness to note them, people are generally reluctant to claim the dark night as part of their experience because maybe it feels arrogant to do so. You may have called them depression. They may have come or gone. So I think claiming the dark night means the death of me as I have known me. So I come to my experience of the work that I do today through my own life experience. Because I really believe life is and has taught me everything that I most need to be. And like the prayer that I read to you at the beginning, there have been people on the journey to help. And there have been times to rest. So, back in 1994, I had been treated for depression for some time. Not very effectively. I, fortunately, several years before that, happened to get in to doing some work with a spiritual director. Because I had met this woman and I liked her. I felt a resonance, a heart resonance with her. And she started sharing some of this with me. And my dark night was a very, very deep one. And it landed me up at a treatment center for a month that had a highly organized spiritual program as a part of it. It was such a blessing. And there was a nurse who met with me every day. And she would ask me how I was doing, and I would say to her, I'm dying. Because I felt like I was dying. I'm dying. So when people are clinically depressed, that's an important question to ask them. I'm dying. Usually what that means, they're in such pain they don't want to live with that pain anymore. Many people will not act on that, but there's always the concern for those who do have suicidal ideation. But in the spiritual journey, there are parts of ourselves that have to die for us to grow. For us, for what needs to come out in us, for what needs to be healed to happen. Dying is a part of life, and in this society, we so often deny that in any form. The seasons are great for teaching us about that. Life, spring, newness, summer, fullness, fall, letting go, winter, the appearance of dying. But there's lots of activity going on deep in there. So I want to share here this story about Teresa of Avila, who was very close to John of the Cross. So we have these deceptions that we've taken in as truth, these delusions, these deceptions. And then if I'm lucky enough, that seems so, in retrospect, that's easy to say, because at the time there can be great pain going on, so much pain. I know the old ways don't work anymore. It's like the coping mechanisms Randy talked about. They don't work anymore. This is good because then something needs to happen. We can begin to return to the true self. So what happens during the dark night? This is what John of the Cross says in terms of helping people to distinguish the dark night from depression. In clinical depression, a person may experience various levels of dysfunction in their thinking, they're concentrating, they're sleeping, and there are patterns of daily life. In spiritual darkness, one's thinking, despite their internal suffering, which can be great, is usually fairly clear. And their desire for God is strong. It doesn't go away. The person in darkness will usually function quite well in life. Think of Mother Teresa. While one dealing with a true depression may experience struggle in many parts of life. So what's happening in this darkness is spiritual transformation. So Teresa uses the image of the silkworm's journey from caterpillar to butterfly to help us understand the best we can this process. So I'd like to go through this story with you because many of you have heard it. This is the journey of spiritual transformation. So there is this caterpillar, which is a being, and something happens in this caterpillar that says it is time to move inward, so it finds a place to park itself. And it begins to weave around it a chrysalis, a container, a sacred space. And when that caterpillar is ensconced in that safely, there is a process which we know and can describe, but we can't understand of how that comes about.
that caterpillar begins to disintegrate. And it becomes a mush. It goes from form to formlessness. Or this mush that doesn't have any form. Then what happens apparently is something is activated. This is a process we don't know about. Something is activated. But scientists have called this, I would call it the divine DNA, but they call it imaginals. Discs are activated in the caterpillar. I'll call it imaginal cells. I like that word better. These imaginal cells are activated. And in the caterpillar itself, there's an immune response so that the cells that are there of the caterpillar begin to fight these imaginal cells. Okay, that's a normal reaction. The caterpillar cells fight and devour those new imaginal cells. And this goes back and forth for some time until the caterpillar cells lose their power. They lose their ability to fight. And so fight is the operative word. That's kind of what I see for the caterpillar cells, whereas for the imaginal cells, they continue to just come. They continue to come and to do their work to meet and to stop the growth of the caterpillar cells. And when that process happens, a butterfly is created. Think about a new creation in Christ. A new creation. But that this caterpillar had to come from the darkness. And then there is the whole venture of coming out. So I'm remembering as a little kid of just being fascinated by the chrysalises. And of course my brother and I and all of our friends, we would go and we would find one, we'd open them up and we'd find whatever in it. I feel terrible about that today, that we did that. But you know, that's normal kid curiosity. That's how we learn. That's how we learn, right? So the other thing is that then the caterpillars, the butterfly, has to do its own work for working its way out of the chrysalis. If the caterpillar doesn't do its own work, if the butterfly doesn't do its own work, it will be stunted in its growth. It has to do its own work. And when it comes out, when it's fully out, it has to rest. It doesn't just fly off. It has to rest because there is a liquid or fluid on it that has to solidify to keep the wings strong. And then it can fly away. This is what I believe the dark night is in human beings. We go into this place where we are disintegrating really at some level within us so that that new being can come forth in us. The heart is an organ of perception. The word perception now. And as Randy was saying, perception is everything, our thoughts. It's so easy to have thought distortions. Things that I think are fact are probably personal opinions or judgments or evaluations or interpretations. I was thinking for myself about what's true for me. I can kind of come down to about 3 things. God is, I am, you are, we are, maybe 4 things for that. Everything else are the beliefs and the perceptions that I have come to. So what I want to give to the world is what comes from me. And what is it? What's the kind of energy that I bring and want to give to the world? The energy of clearness of God, or the energy of fear and anxiety, which can be so embedded in depression and in spiritual darkness. So, the electromagnetic field of the heart is many, many times that of the brain. And so what I believe is happening in this whole process, spiritually, is that the energy of the heart is being strengthened. So when we're the face of mercy for someone, for those who are afflicted, which would be all of us have affliction. I would offer these things. Hang on and hang in there. Not very profound, but it's the truth. Hang on. Trust in the slow work of God. God's work is slow. We're in a society that wants everything fast, 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 and now, and I don't want to hurt. I don't want to hurt. Be about your life the best you can. Enough is enough, whatever it is. Engage a spiritually sensitive therapist, a spiritual director, a contemplatively oriented pastor, or a deeply trusted friend in this process. Spiritual directors have gone through specific training programs to understand this work of spiritual growth and development and the fundamentals of deep listening. And they have received training on when to refer people when they sense the need for counseling or something in addition to spiritual direction. I have a sheet that I put out over on the table where the handouts are that have 10 things to do in the darkness. And finally, trust some more. For caregivers, become the face of mercy. Learn the ministry of presence. Learn the ministry of presence more than the ministry of words. With words, less is better. I have a dear friend right now who is dying. And a few times a week I go over because she's such a social being that when people come over, she's entertaining, talking to them, and she gets exhausted. But when I go over, I rub her feet and tell her to be quiet unless she really wants to talk. And I'm just there with her. We hang out in quiet. So in our own growth, we have to get comfortable with silence and having a strong center. Gerald May says, and I love this, don't be a pest. Don't be a pest. Don't be a cheerleader. Be a quiet, loving friend. Don't try to get someone through something you may not have a fuller understanding of. That's them. Learn to respond from your own spiritual well, which means that you take care of yourself in the way that you need to. It could be that all of those things that I just said for the afflicted apply for caregivers as well. Okay, I'm at the end of the time, but I'm going to finish with another prayer. Above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are quite naturally impatient in everything to reach the end without delay. We should like to skip the intermediate stages. We are impatient of being on the way to something unknown, something new, and yet it is the law of all progress that it is made by passing through stages of instability and that it may take a very long time. And so I think it is with you. Your ideas mature gradually. Let them grow. Let them shape themselves without undue haste. Don't try to force them on as though you could be today what time, that is to say, grace and circumstances, acting upon your own goodwill, will make of you tomorrow. Only God could say what this new spirit gradually forming within you will be. Give our Lord the benefit of believing that his hand is leading you, and accept the anxiety of feeling yourself in suspension and incomplete. That is by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. So there'll be time for questions. I hope this generated questions for you, and then we will be having time during our group question and answer period to talk about those. Break time.